You know, Mr. President, with all that's happened in the last couple of weeks, I feel like we are at one of those historical moments where future generations will look back and they'll decide who we were. Are you the president to unite all of us, given everything that's happening right now?
Well, I certainly think so, and I certainly hope so. And the relationships we have are incredible. The spirit of this country, and especially considering what happened. I mean, we had out of nowhere a plague come in from China. It just came in, and it came to all over the world. It went all over the world. You look at 186 countries, and they were devastated. And we were certainly hit very hard. Some were hit harder than us, relatively, but we were hit very, very hard. And now we're making our comeback. And then on top of it, we had the riots, which were unnecessary to the extent they were. If the governors and mayors would have taken a stronger action, I think the riots would have been, you could call them protesters, you could call them riots. They were different nights, different things. In Minneapolis, they went numerous nights, and then I said, you got to get the guard in there. We got the guard in there, and it all stopped. They could have done that earlier. Now you look at what's going on in, I mean, you could look at a couple of places that are in such great shape, but then you look at Seattle, look at that, what's that all about? How do they allow that to happen? That's just a bad philosophy. So I think it's incredible where we are and what we've done considering where we came from. We were riding high. We had the greatest economy in history. We had the greatest employment numbers in history, including Black, African American. If you look at the African American numbers, were incredible, the best they've ever been. Spanish, if you look at Hispanic and Asian numbers, women numbers, everybody. And then we got hit with this plague, this horrible plague, and it was devastating for many ways, including the lives that were lost. That can never be regained. The economics we're going to gain. Economically, we're going to be great. Next year, we're going to have a fantastic year. I think we're going to have a fantastic third quarter. But you can never replace the lives.
I want to talk with you about where we are just in terms of the Black community, people of color.
Yeah.
You know, I hear you use the word rioter, and I understand. We covered it on Fox News. I covered much of that at night as it was bursting a couple of Saturday nights ago.
Right.
The looting. And it was heartbreaking to see businesses, small businesses, which we know employ north of 66% of people in America. Yeah, it was. At the same time, you had peaceful protesters, and they were hurting. And I know from your team, you watched that 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd. And Mr. President, your response to that is different than a person of color. And I'm a mom. When he called out mom on that tape, it's a heart punch. So I'm curious from you, what do you think the protesters, not the looters and the rioters, we're intelligent enough to know the difference in our country, right? What do you think they want? What do you think they need right now from you?
So I think you had protesters for different reasons, and then you had protesting also because, you know, they just didn't know. I watched it very closely. Why are you here? And they really weren't able to say, but they were there for a reason perhaps, but a lot of them really were there because they're following the crowd. A lot of them were there because what we witnessed was a terrible thing. What we saw was a terrible thing. And we've seen it over the years. We haven't, you know, this was one horrible example, but you've seen other terrible examples. You know that better than anybody would know it. And I know it. I've seen it too. I've seen it before I was president.
What do you say
during
to that?
the presidency, I've seen it. I think it's a shame. I think it's a disgrace, and it's got to stop. At the same time, you also know that we have incredible people in law enforcement, and we have to cherish them and take care of them. And we can't let something like this, where you have a bad apple, go out and, you know, destroy the image of of millions of people that take really good care of us. And then you have a movement where they say, let's not have a police department. And you say, where are these people coming from?
All right, so do you think you're perhaps closer than the nation might have ever been right now with police reform? You've got both sides talking. You've got the third most powerful person in the House, James Clyburn, saying no to defunding police. We need reform. What are you in favor of?
That's a big step when he says no, because everyone understands that. And I don't know, is that just a phrase to break things up?
No, because he was talking about some of the things that would be in a bipartisan bill. I mean, I can't put words in his mouth. I can only tell you.
No, I'm not talking about him. I'm saying when they talk about police, when they actually talk about beyond defunding, they actually go all out, because defunding to a lot of people means break up the police forces, and either that or don't give them any money. So
what do you want to see?
breaking it up.
Like, what is
I want to
policing reform
see.
to you?
I want to see really compassionate but strong law enforcement, police force, but law enforcement.
Say no
And
to
I don't want to see
chokeholds?
mistakes. Yeah, I don't like chokeholds. Now I will say this, as somebody that, you know, you grow up and you wrestle and you fight and you this, or you see what happens. Sometimes if you're alone and you're fighting somebody who's tough, and you get somebody in a chokehold, what are you going to do? Say, oh, and it's a real bad person, and you know that, and they do exist. I mean, we have some real bad people. You saw that during the last couple of weeks. You saw some very good people protesting, but you saw some bad people also, and you get somebody in a chokehold, and what are you going to do now? Let go and say, oh, let's start all over again. I'm not allowed to have you in a chokehold. It's a tough situation. Now, if you have two people,
Or
and in the case that we're talking about,
Right,
you had
George.
4 people,
Yeah.
and 2 of them, I guess, just pretty much started.
So
It's a very tricky situation.
That's an
So the
interesting
chokehold
point.
thing is good, because to talk about, because off the cuff it would sound like absolutely, but if you're thinking about it, then you realize maybe there is a bad fight, and the officer gets somebody in a position that's
So
a
you
very
say
tough
it's a
position.
sliding scale depending on what the circumstances
I
are.
think you have to probably say
Do you
that.
want to be in that conversation? Are you in that conversation
I
right now?
really am, and I think the concept of chokehold sounds so innocent, so perfect, and then you realize if it's a one-on-one, now if it's 2-on-1, that's a little bit of a different story, depending on the toughness and strength. You know, we're talking about toughness and strength. We are talking, there's a physical thing here also. But if a police officer is in a bad scuffle and he's got somebody in
Well,
a
if it's a
chokehold,
one-on-one fight for the life.
yeah, and
that's
that
what
does
you're saying.
happen, and that does happen.
But
too.
in
So you
terms
have
of-
to be careful. With that being said, it would be, I think, a very good thing that, generally speaking, it should be ended.
That's interesting. Do you want that to be a top-down federal, or should it be at the local level?
Well, it
Because
could be at
that's the
local
question
level.
right now,
Yeah,
is
it could be at
Congress goes
local
back
level.
and forth too.
It could be local level, and in some cases it will be local level, but I think we can certainly make recommendations, and they can be very strong recommendations.
You look at me, and I'm Paris on TV, but I'm a black woman. I'm a mom. And, you know, and you've talked about it, but we haven't seen you come out and be that consoler in this instance. And the tweets. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. Why those words?
So that's an expression I've heard over the years, and it
Do you know where it
really
comes
means
from?
I think Philadelphia, the mayor of Philadelphia, from what
It comes from 1967. I was about 18 months old at the time. Everybody's shooting Wiki because they probably got it wrong. But it was from the chief of police in Miami. He was cracking down, and he meant what he said. And he said, I don't even care if it makes it look like brutality, I'm going to crack down when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That frightened a lot of people when you
Well,
tweeted
it
that.
also comes from a very tough mayor, who I might have been police commissioner at the time, but I think mayor of Philadelphia, named Frank Rizzo, and he had an expression like that. But I've heard it many times from, I think it's been used many times. It means 2 things, very different things. One is, if there's looting, there's probably going to be shooting, and that's not as a threat, that's really just a fact, because that's what happens. And the other is, if there's looting, there's going to be shooting. They're very different meanings.
Oh, interesting.
No, it's very different meanings, but I think
Do you
that,
think most people see it that way?
I think they see it both ways. No, I mean, I've had it viewed both ways. I think it's meant both ways, not by the same person. But when the looting starts, it oftentimes means there's going to be shooting, there's going to be death, there's going to be killing, and it's a bad thing. And it's also used as a threat. It's used both ways. But if you think about it, look at what happened, how people were devastated with the looting. Look at what happened.
Your